Hello, my name is Professor Richard Ladyshewsky, and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to talk about peer learning for the Peer Learning Institute. My work on peer learning and coaching has spanned over 25 years, and I've been promoting and using this model of learning in work-integrated learning settings, in leadership development, and skills-based coaching. It's a highly effective, low-cost strategy that organizations can use to promote learning and the transfer of training to actual work-based practice. Organizations spend a lot of money on training and development, but sadly a lot of that money isn't necessarily back in the organization with respect to transfer of learning. And so you don't see that improved performance. So if you think of a course, for example, that you might have sent somebody to, might have been very expensive, but when they come back, you actually don't see the kind of change in behavior that you would have expected. And again, that money you invested probably wasn't worth the investment because of this lack of change in performance. Now, the problem with courses is that they're often very content driven, and so while they provide good information, it's stored in the long-term memory of the brain, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's transferred back into skills practice, which is a much more integrative problem that requires linking theory to practice, changing different reflexes and ways of thinking, and how that then gets applied within the work context. This can take quite a lot of time and practice, and this is where peers can be excellent coaches to help them succeed. Of course, some courses don't necessarily need peer learning, particularly those that are very technical. So for example, learning CPR, how to use an Excel spreadsheet, or operating a machine. A manual, some practice with a bit of teaching and some supervision usually can get the skill to a point where the person can then go off and do that independently and very accurately. But this is quite different from more complex skills such as conflict management, being more emotionally intelligent, leading teams, carrying out performance reviews. There's no right one way to do it because it can vary quite a lot in the context. And so this is where peer learning can be quite fantastic to assist learners. I remember many, many years ago in my first job as a newly graduated physical therapist, I was fortunate enough to work with 3 other clinicians who had all graduated within 1 year of each other. So we all had, similar amounts of learning in our brain. We had not a lot of experience. So what was really fantastic, we could use each other as peers to test out our ideas, test the reliability of our knowledge. Were we doing the right thing? Why weren't we getting the results that we had hoped? And we were able to support each other really well and saw an incredible acceleration in our professional practice and competency. So when we talk about peer learning, we're talking a lot about using this learning methodology to engage learners. And there's some interesting theoretical models that are very helpful here. One is David Rock's work on the brain and his model called SCARF, S-C-A-R-F. And he talks about how the brain is either drawn towards something or pushes back against something depending upon how it's going to reward or threaten the individual. So things like status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness can really have an impact on learning. The other model is the Johari window, which is quite an older model but has withstood the test of time. And it describes how people withhold or share information with others depending on how safe and or vulnerable they feel respectively. So when we think about peer learning, what it's doing, it's engaging learners because it equalizes status and it provides some certainty around what it is they're specifically going to work on and learn. And this ensures the learner has autonomy because they're self-directing what it is they want to improve for their individual performance. Because it's a peer relationship and they're helping each other, it's also a supportive one in the kind that is not quite a friendship but has a lot of elements of trust and confidence in it, so it improves relatedness. And so when you build these things into the learning environment, it creates an attraction for the brain, a desire to be part of it, and as you start to get some successes with the learning, then a whole variety of brain changes, which I won't get into right now with respect to learning, start to come into play. And this then ends up with the person being in a much more positive emotional state, which of course maximizes learning, innovation, and creativity, things you want in the workplace. Now, provided the learners and the peers develop some basic coaching skills and listening skills and ability to ask specific kinds of questions, the amount of transfer of training and learning can improve quite substantially. So let me use an example of a fictitious person named Mary who was sent on a course to improve her conflict management skills. Mary goes on an expensive course, non-returning. The same problems that were there before are emerging again. While there was some slight improvement, basically you only probably get about maybe a 15% return on the investment in terms of what her performance was able to demonstrate in terms of a change. So not an uncommon outcome, but not a good use of the training investment money. So let's look at how this could have been improved. So Mary could have attended the course, perhaps with another peer, and the non-returning could be linked to this same peer or another peer in the organization or within a peer group to help the transfer of training and knowledge to the workplace. Because the peers are not her boss, the power relationship is changed and the status is more equalized. So Mary isn't going to feel like she's being evaluated or under pressure. So she's more likely to talk about how she's feeling and where she's struggling or not understanding the course content in relationship to her skills and her work-based practice. So she's in control of this development, which is giving her the autonomy that she wants in a status-neutral relationship. She likes the peer group that she's working with, so there's that relatedness. And so hopefully the outcome that she's going to get is going to give her some certainty about improving her performance, which is what she wants because obviously she wants to keep her job. So this act of learning is what stimulates the brain to participate, particularly if it's directed towards some specific goals. And again, the peers should be able to support each other without this evaluation to help establish those goals. So the peer may be able to help Mary with, for example, learning to listen better in team meetings, to not react when people challenge her ideas, to ask more questions, to gain understanding, and maybe some discussion about her expectations and some of her own personal internal self-talk that may be hindering her performance. And this can all be done in a very safe way. So now what Mary can do is she can come regularly to meet with her peer with a focus on this very specific aspect of her learning. She can keep a journal of her successes and failures in her day-to-day or weekly interactions with people, and then she can bring this back to her peer or peer group, and they can start asking her some challenging questions which will make her think more laterally and deeply about her performance, her knowledge about conflict management and how it's working or not working, and what she needs to change. Meeting with the peers also increases a sense of accountability, so that Mary is now focusing and practicing on these very specific things because she knows she has to come back and report regularly to her peer group on her learning and progress. So what's happening here then is Mary is moving through what David Kolb calls the experiential learning cycle. And that's enabling her to construct a more integrated application of the theory she learned in her course to the workplace. So she can look at her experiences, write about them after in her journal, reflect on it with some coaching and support from her peer group, and then with them make some new conclusions about how she can go back and change her practice in the next application. And this starts to create a cyclical kind of experiential learning loop, which sort of scaffolds her learning in a way that through each progressive loop, her skill level just increases that slightly increases a bit more, to a higher level, and eventually she can construct quite a powerful new way of being in the workplace. Okay. And what is happening is that Mary's engaging more of her brain in this transformation, and it's likely these new skills are going to be more enduring and permanent because the process is now linking that knowledge in long-term memory with working memory and linking it into some of the emotional part of the brain that drives behavior. So over time, this restructuring of this knowledge to her skill becomes more permanent with more well-developed neural pathways. So peer learning creates a very exciting dynamic for workplaces to build a stronger organizational learning climate. It's also a low-cost alternative to expensive courses and executive coaches, as all organizations have peers that can help peers learn certain things. They can support each other in a myriad of ways to improve their performance in the workplace. It doesn't always have to be an expensive course. All it takes is some investment in setting up the process, helping peers to develop appropriate coaching and support skills and goal-setting abilities, and then giving them some time to achieve these targets. The social aspects of the learning will then take place, provided the peers, as I said before, are prepared to be somewhat vulnerable in the process by recognizing they need to learn. And this is where the Peer Learning Institute can be helpful to you in setting up these processes and tailoring some of the learning objectives you have for your staff. So in conclusion, my research has shown that peer learning can increase competency levels, promote transfer of training initiatives and practice, improve confidence, and reduce anxiety during learning. Participants report enjoying the experience of learning in this context because it's outside of the typical manager-subordinate evaluation process, and therefore feels less threatening and more engaging. Now, I've had success in the workplace training settings where students learn with each other, for example, in leadership training programs where managers support managers, and in my own classrooms at university where we use peer learning to build coaching skills for managers. So I hope you and your organization will give it a try. You'll be surprised by the outcomes and the impact. Thank you very much. And after this, I've just left some resources for you to follow up on if you're interested. Thank you.